Hi, and welcome. Today's lesson is based on chapter 36 from the book Initiation into Spiritism, and it's called The Parable of the Lamp Under the Basket. My name is Peter Hayes, and I'm with Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. So when we reflect on this chapter, it's going to be based primarily on chapter 36, and I will go through the parts of that chapter. But I'm also going to reference, in addition, the Spirit's book and the Gospel According to Spiritism. The Spirit's book was the first book in the codification for Spiritism, and the Gospel According to Spiritism is the third book. I'm also going to mention a little bit, just a little bit, from the Medium's book, which was the second book. Okay, so when we start to think about the parable of the lamp under the table, it is based upon three versions that appear in the Gospels. The first two versions are from Luke and Mark, and they're somewhat similar. Here's what Luke says. Jesus says, "No one, after lighting a lamp, covers it with a jar or puts it under a bed, but puts it on a stand, so that those who enter may see the light. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." The version in Mark goes like this. "And he said to them, is a lamp brought in to be put under a basket or under a bed, and not on a stand? For nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light." Now, both Luke and Mark have a somewhat similar structure, and the placing of them is similar in both Gospels. Just before Jesus says this, he does explain why he speaks in parables. And one of the points he makes to the disciples is that those who have much will receive more. And when he means by much, he's talking about their attributes, their ability to understand and receive more, and also to give more. And those who have less, even what they have, will be taken away. This is a figure of speech that basically says when we make an effort, we start to receive. When we don't make an effort, when we're selfish, sometimes even what we have may be taken away for now. Now, the third version of the saying of the lamp under the basket is in Matthew. And the setup of this one is a little different. I'll read it. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." This is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 to 16. That means that it is part of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's just after the very beginning the Sermon on the Mount starts off with the Beatitudes. And then Jesus mentions this. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he is, of course, on a hill, and he is talking to a group of people, not just the disciples. In Luke and Mark, Jesus is talking directly to disciples only. So when he says, "You are the light of the world," that can be directed towards the disciples who are part of the group of people listening to Jesus, but it could be to anyone who is truly taking in the teachings that he is offering. So in these three versions, you'll notice that there are some similarities. In all three versions, they basically make the point that once a lamp has been lit, it doesn't make sense to put it under a basket or a bed. Sometimes you see bushel, which I'll say more about in a moment. That's one of the similarities in all three versions. There's another similarity in all three versions, which is the idea that nothing is hidden. Nothing is hidden, or a city on a hill cannot be hidden. This is a reference to truth, which we'll talk about more soon. But before we get there, what is Jesus talking about when he mentions a lamp? Well, this is the time of ancient Rome. And a lamp during the time of ancient Rome looked something like this, and it was very common. It's basically just a container, a clay container with a wick, and it was usually drenched in olive oil, and it provided basic light. The typical Roman home didn't have a kitchen, for instance, so the source of light was either a lamp like this, or, I hate to admit it, sometimes small fires, bonfires, which caused a lot of problems in ancient Rome, as you can imagine. But when Jesus talks about a lamp, he's referring to something like this. When he mentions a basket, or sometimes you see the word bushel, a bushel, for instance, is a container, but it has more to do with dry measurement. It's roughly 8 gallons or 30 liters, but it has it was more of a container for dry goods like wheat. And so obviously it was used in agriculture. And this makes sense because, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, Jesus frequently spoke in terminology that references agriculture because it is the time that Jesus lived in. It was primarily an agricultural society. So, in chapter 36 of Initiation into Spiritism, Teresina of the Oliveira, Teresina Oliveira takes of the 3 versions of the parable, the lamp under the basket that I read to you. She focuses on Matthew. And I'll read it again really quick. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Teresina Oliveira makes comments on each sentence in this passage. The first one, you are the light of the world. And Teresina Oliveira points out to us that light is certainly a form of energy that allows us to see, which illuminates, it clarifies, it makes things well defined and recognizable. And without it, darkness would complicate and confuse everything. And I'm going to share with you a definition of light from according to physics. This is a definition in physics. The form of electromagnetic radiation to which the human eye is sensitive, and on which our visual awareness of the universe and its contents relies. So far, we're talking more about the physical aspect of light. Light is obviously something that can be seen, it can be observed. In physics, light is largely made up of waves, but it also contains particles. And for the last 4 centuries or so, scientists were debating as to whether or not is light only wave, is light only particles, and so forth. Well, it was discovered later in the 20th century that it's a little bit of both. Sometimes light is wave and particles, and sometimes it's not wave or particles. And this realization led to the beginnings of quantum mechanics and wave mechanics as well. And the understanding of light, which is not fully understood, by the way, is essential in modern physics. It's still a very important thing to study and to understand. But there's also the metaphorical implications of light, which we're going to get into. Teresina Oliveira points out that the disciples who Jesus was talking to had spiritual knowledge, and that they and others could illuminate the understanding of their humanity with their qualities. So the disciples had a special gift, and the disciples had the ability to inspire others. How? And why does that matter so much? Well, I'm going to switch over to the Spirit's book, because in the 3rd part of the Spirit's book, which focuses on the divine laws, One part of that is the social law, which is covered, at least question 766 to 768, covers some aspects of the social law. And here's the general points that are made in those questions. God made humans to live in society. So there's a strong hint here. We operate better when we're in a group. We have been given speech and other faculties for a social purpose. We don't just speak because. We speak because we learn from each other. Communication, obviously, is essential for us to not only learn from one another, but to inspire one another. That's one way in which that occurs. We instinctively seek associations and we advance progress by helping one another. There is, of course, a very strong hint here that if we are habitually isolated, that is not good for us. We thrive when we're in a group. Does that mean we can never be isolated? Well, obviously, there are times in our lives where we are isolated, and the purpose of that and whether it's helpful, emotionally healthy or not, depends on what we're doing. But if people want to isolate themselves and live in their own little world, this is not good. It's not good for our progress. It doesn't help humanity as a whole. And that's the last point being made here, that we seek society because we cannot progress alone. And Teresina Oliveira elaborates in chapter 36 that whoever possesses spiritual knowledge and virtues by these very same qualities stands out among average people, becoming naturally noticeable among them. So not only are we meant to live in society, we're meant to notice, be noticed, and to notice others. It's not a one-way street. We have to both be inspired by people and do what we can to inspire others, which again is a subject unto itself, because sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. But again, we're not here just to live in our own little world and live in habitual isolation. It's not healthy, and it doesn't contribute to the progress of humanity. And this point, you are the light of the world, and it means all of these things, leads to the next sentence that Jesus says, because Jesus is talking in symbols, and especially in this next sentence, which is, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. As Teresina Oliveira points out, indeed it stands out for everyone to see. If you just think about it, if the city is on a hill, how can you not notice it? If it's nighttime, it's probably safe to say at least one light is on. And obviously, if the moonlight is on, then if there's moonlight present, you can still see the city. Then chapter 36 from Initiation into Spiritism adds another little point, which may come out of left field just a little bit, but it's an intriguing comment from Teresina Oliveira, which is, she then mentions in a mediumistic instruction, we learn that light, however dim, is always noticeable in darkness, even in most dense darkness. So what is this talking about? Well, in Spiritism, where mediumistic meetings occur at times in certain Spiritist centers, usually privately, I won't get into the details of that here, but in a mediumistic session, mediums learn that light is always noticeable in darkness. Well, I'm going to switch over to the Medium's book, chapter 20. This is part 2 of the Medium's book, but chapter 20, which is called The Medium's Moral Influence. And it talks about the nature of communications with mediums, because mediums are receiving communications and connecting with spirits from the other side. The codification in Spiritism is based on mediumship. The information in the codification comes from higher level spirits from the other side. So if we think about this process of mediumship and communication, chapter 20 in the Medium's book, item 226, question 12, the question is asked, if the word of high order spirits cannot come to us in its purest form except under such difficult conditions, isn't it an obstacle to spreading the truth? In other words, suppose you have a medium who's receiving like a paragraph of just brilliant commentary from a higher level spirit, really inspirational teaching. And suppose that medium's lucky if they only catch like a third of it. Well, isn't that an obstacle to spreading the truth? The answer to that is interesting. You might think, well, yeah, it is. In other words, mediumship's kind of clumsy. But the answer says no. The light always comes to those who desire to receive it. Those who desire enlightenment must run from darkness, and darkness is to be found in the impurity of the heart. So already there's an implication. In a mediumistic context, maybe a medium won't get all of a inspirational message, but they get some of it. And there will be other opportunities down the road. And more importantly, the light comes to those who desire to receive it. Who are those? All of us, if we want to receive it. That's one of the major points of this lesson today, lesson 24. And look at this next part of this sentence, that those who desire enlightenment must run from darkness. In other words, take some personal responsibility and not be attuned to darkness. And darkness is to be found in the impurity of the heart. That's an important point because that implies that darkness is not the natural state of things. Darkness is the absence of light. Light is the natural state of things. So when Jesus says you are the light of the world, and a city set on a hill cannot be hidden, he's saying that is what is normal. Living in darkness is not normal. But more importantly, living in darkness doesn't have to be. We don't have to be in darkness. The natural state of things is light, assuming we allow ourselves to be within the light. Teresina Oliveira also says that once thought and feeling have been placed at the highest level of the Christian ideal, it cannot be concealed that they are far above the thinking and feeling of ordinary people. Okay, so what is the Christian ideal? If we go to the third book in the Spiritist codification, the Gospel According to Spiritism, chapter 24 also talks about this same proverb. Do not hide your lamp under a bushel. Remember, bushel, basket, bed, it's basically the same thing. In this chapter 24, the following point is made. Jesus points out that both charity toward neighbor and humility are the express condition of salvation. So when we think about what is the Christian ideal, part of it, an important part of it, is charity toward neighbor, and also learning how to be humble as we move through life. And this helps us with salvation, which is a form of personal liberation, inner freedom, if you will. But also, if we look at the Spirit's book, first book in the codification, under the, again, part 3, divine laws, this one is the law of justice, love, and charity. Question 886 asks, what is the definition of charity? The answer is benevolence toward everyone, indulgence towards the imperfections of others, and forgiveness of offenses. So when we talk about having light within ourselves, we go a long way in kindling and developing this light when we learned how to have benevolence for everyone. That may be in a simple concept. Oh yeah, I know, we're supposed to be good to everybody, but it's really hard to do. It's difficult, and it's something we spend many lifetimes working on. But if we can start to instinctively have a sincere and natural goodwill towards others, then we're already starting to bring out that light. What about indulgence towards the imperfections of others? Obviously, we notice when people have faults. People certainly notice our faults, and we have lots of them, every one of us. But can we learn to be more accepting, especially when we're with family members, for instance, and they've got certain qualities that we know we wish were a little better, but that's who they are. That does not mean we tolerate everything. We do need to have boundaries with people and so forth. But at the same time, do we need to go around judging everyone and immediately throwing our arms up in the air every time somebody disappoints us? If we go through life like that, we're probably going to wind up alone if we can't tolerate anybody because everyone's imperfections get to us. Some people can be like that. And again, that can be a recipe for isolation. What about forgiveness of offenses? All three of these you could spend an entire course and then some discussing. But with forgiveness of offenses, again, can we learn to let go? If we've been hurt by someone, can we begin to try not to take it, not let it stay with us? It doesn't mean we forget. It doesn't mean we act like nothing ever happened. But can we learn to detach ourselves a little bit more by really learning not to take everything so deeply? Sometimes things are very hurtful and that can be difficult. But there may be many instances where something happens and in the grand scheme of things, it's just not as important as we may think it is. And this is connected to another point, which is question 887 says what is the real meaning of love your enemies? We're supposed to love people who commit crimes and maybe commit serious harm to either us or to our family members? No. What it means is we're not going to love, say, a criminal that hurts us the same way we would love a family member. That's impossible. But we don't need to hate that person. We don't need to immediately act as though all we want is for that person to suffer. In other words, we don't immediately and instinctively go in the direction of retribution. So if we learn to love our enemies, again, we learn to appreciate that we are all God's children. We all are eventually going to progress. And yes, there are people all around us that behave in all kinds of ways that are sometimes very hard to forgive. But can we see them as they too are human beings who are also God's children like ourselves? Okay, we're going to go back to this passage from Matthew. We got through the first two sentences. I'm going to read this again just to remind everyone. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So, the next sentence, the third one. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Teresina Oliveira, in chapter 36, comments, we, the incarnate, are intelligent beings, light beams of spiritual energy placed into earthen containers, that is, our human bodies. So again, when Jesus is talking about the light and a lamp, it can be interpreted, Teresina Oliveira, is interpreting it as a metaphor for the human spirit. And the human spirit does have the capacity to grow and to develop. And we're placed in these containers, our bodies, which are temporary. And that is an important point because our bodies are wonderful instruments. We learn a lot by being in our bodies, but the light is really our spirit. And Spiritism emphasizes that when we cross over, the only thing we take with us is our spirit, and that is essentially our knowledge, what we've learned, who we are. It's not our bodies, obviously. And yet we live in a world in which people are very tempted to be very attached to their bodies. But there is a hint here about where the priorities should be. We don't deny our bodies. Our bodies are very important. We should be thankful for the bodies we have. And I say that knowing full well that some people struggle with their bodies a lot. But if you think about it this way, everything we experience is an opportunity to learn. So therefore, even the type of body we have, there are lessons to be learned. And bodies don't stay the same, of course. We age, we go through all kinds of changes and so forth. So, but what are we learning along the way? And that is the source of the light. But also, Teresina Oliveira says that God lit this lamp, animated this earthen container with our spirit, full of intelligence and sensitivity. So again, emphasizing once again that the lamp is meant to keep going. There are traditions in religions where there's an emphasis on the light not going out. And if we think of the light as a metaphor for the spirit, it's that idea. Okay, so we have this light and it's a metaphor for the spirit. And God lit this lamp. In other words, God gave us a spirit. Why? For what purpose? Well, if we think about the next sentence, what are we supposed to do with this light? Put it on a stand. We don't put it down low or under a basket. We put it on a stand and it gives light to all who are in the house. Teresina Oliveira, in other words, emphasizes to us or reminds us that it's a special support placed on a high point. Then she puts in the kicker. What is this stand? What does it represent? She says, Christian perspective, both worthy and kind. I'm going to add to this, when we talk about the Christian perspective, we're talking about values that are universal. You could be from any religion to follow what we're going to talk about. You don't have to necessarily be a Christian because we understand not everybody is. But when we think about as she puts it, the Christian perspective, what is that? Well, if we go back to the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 17, which is called Be Perfect, it mentions the concept of duty. We, all of us, have a duty to, quote, let our light shine before others. So that's pretty direct, isn't it? It's not just maybe, but we should. It's part of our duty. God wants the beauty of its work to shine before its presences. So if we are making an effort to be in harmony with God, then we need to work on developing our spiritual progress, and that's how our light begins to increase, begins to shine. By shining, we demonstrate and inspire others through our example. Again, remember what I mentioned a few minutes ago in the Spirit's book. We are naturally gregarious, we human beings. We thrive in society, not living by ourselves in our own little cave, our own little cyber world, or whatever it is. We thrive as a group. We learn better from one another. And the more we work on our own progress, the more we can perhaps inspire others through our example, or others can inspire us through their example. I'm talking about positive examples. We rise above ingratitude and rebellion. Two major sources of unhappiness. Ingratitude, the person who habitually complains or just takes everything for granted, doesn't really care what others are doing or what gifts they have, they just blow it off. That's those types of ingratitude. It's hard to be happy when one is full of ingratitude in those ways. What about rebellion? One of the biggest obstacles to our spiritual progress is when we're constantly rebelling. And again, I could spend an entire presentation discussing that subject, but the ways in which we talk about, or the ways in which we refuse to cooperate. Maybe there's things we know we should be doing and we don't really put the effort in, or we're deliberately in denial about what aspects of our personality that we need to work on and things like that. There's all types of rebelling out there. And it's one of the biggest struggles that all of us can go through. But the more we can begin to dissolve that impulse to rebel in ways that are not helpful, then we can begin to allow our light to shine and again to be more of a positive inspiration for others around us. Chapter 17 in the Gospel According to Spiritism also says the light is infinite. You remember I mentioned in the Medium's book, when I was talking about that light is the natural state of things. Darkness is the absence of light. So the light is infinite. We have various ways to experience and live by the good. This implies that the ways in which we can live by the good are much more numerous than the ways in which we can be bad. But when we don't behave well, we experience pain. And this is an interesting comment. There's less variety in the ways we experience pain because of our moral shortcomings. So it's like this. If we start to work and be more in harmony with the good, if we're really making an effort to do so bit by bit, gradually, we open up the possibilities for certainly happiness, but we open up the ways in which we can begin to see, oh, there's actually lots and lots of ways I can be good. When we talk about the kind of pain that we experience because of our moral shortcomings, one of the reasons it's limited is because a lot of times we're playing the same tape or recording in our head, the same kind of repetitive thought that goes over and over and over again, and it keeps us stuck. Chapter 17 also says, anyone who fulfills their duty loves God more than their fellow human beings and fellow human beings more than themselves. This is significant because, again, when we think about how we allow our light to shine, what are we doing? We're saying, I care about others, not just me. I'm not living in a world of me, myself, and I. I am paying attention to my fellow human beings. Others matter to me. Okay, that may be obvious, but how many people in today's world are not doing this? The last sentence, in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Going back to chapter 36, Initiation into Spiritism, Teresina Oliveira says all created beings will eventually be able to see the power. Eventually, the more we work on allowing our light to shine, the more we start to become attuned to God, more connected to God, and we can do that just by being here in our daily lives, we'll start to tap into this power of God bit by bit. And she goes on to say, and we will praise the wisdom and goodness of our Creator, something that we do not do now, because we are not yet able to see the justice, the correctness, and the beauty of life. Okay, so we can't see everything. We don't see the whole picture, as it were, and that can be a little frustrating. But there's an important point that's made in the Gospel according to Spiritism, which in chapter 24, again, back to this, do not hide your lamp under a bushel. I like this point, which I'm going to share with you. Providence reveals truths only gradually. Very important point. When we talk about truth, we talk about being in truth, when we talk about humanity's truth, it doesn't get revealed overnight. It happens very slowly. Why? Well, lots of reasons. But one of them is that we human beings usually learn slowly. Even if we know something to be true, we don't really accept it and we rebel, like I mentioned before, or we simply don't comprehend. It takes a while. Certainly when Jesus spoke to the people of his time, he spoke in proverbs and metaphorical language because they would not have understood some of the deeper points that he was making. So we need the time that we need to eventually understand things, and it can take a while. But the beauty of that is that when we learn a little slower, we learn better. We really start to internalize lessons in ways that resonate more within ourselves. There's another point being made here in this chapter, which is that for there are people who would be stunned and dazzled instead of being enlightened by too bright a light. Again, if truth is revealed too much, too fast, it's like being in a room and suddenly the lights come on full. Well, that may be an ideal state to be in, but we have to get used to it. We have to be ready for it. And a lot of times, if you, for instance, reveal a little too much truth to certain people, it's more than they can take. Sometimes when people tell us too many truthful things about ourselves, we're not really ready for it, not really ready to accept it. So it's usually better to do this gradually. We see the justice, correctness, and beauty of life when we learn to comprehend and bear witness to the truth. This is a comment, again, going back to chapter 36 from Initiation into Spiritism, Teresinha Oliveira's point. We see the justice, correctness, and beauty of life. How? When we begin to bear witness to the truth. That's one of the ways. Because those who are afraid to confess themselves to truth are not worthy of being admitted into the kingdom of the truth. I just switched from, although we're still looking at the gospel here, I made a reference to Teresinha Oliveira's comment, but I'm also referencing a point that Jesus made. Because in Christianity, bearing witness to the truth is an important part of Christianity. In other words, are we willing to be a witness to truth as we understand it? And again, that's a big subject. But if we deny truth, if we're in denial, if we are too proud and we don't want to face certain truths, then as it says here, and this sounds pretty harsh, are not worthy of being admitted into the kingdom of the truth. Well, not at the moment. Down the road, yes, when we're ready, when we truly are willing to confess ourselves to the truth. It is important, you see, when we learn to bear witness to the truth, and it's not an easy thing to do, and it's a work in progress for all of us, but if we can get to that point, we begin to see. We have more light in which to see. When Jesus has been arrested, and he's before Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate's trying to decide what to do with him. Should he crucify him? Should he not have him crucified, and so forth? And Pontius Pilate's trying to figure out who Jesus is. And he says, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus says to him, "You say I'm king." But then Jesus goes on to point out that he is here to bear witness to the truth. And he says, "For this I came into the world to testify to the truth." That's his purpose. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. So if people allow themselves to receive the light, they're not running away. They're running from darkness. They're embracing the light. They don't want to be in darkness. If they can do that, then they're bearing witness to the truth. The truth can be certainly the teachings of Jesus is just one example of that. The truth, our own truth. Do we know who we really are as we go through life? What truths are we understanding about ourselves as we live our lives, and much more? So everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. In other words, when Jesus speaks, we take it in. We do our best to really internalize the teachings, the wisdom that we have available to us. And then we begin to bear witness to the truth. In chapter 24 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, it mentions that wisdom is kept under wraps but never hidden forever. So when we talk about bearing witness to the truth, okay, there's going to be limitations to that. We can see some things now, but based upon who we are, the life we have here in this physical world, of course there are limitations to what we can see. There's a lot we don't see, and we have to operate within those limitations. But here's an important point. When we talk about truth, we talk about wisdom. It may not be available to us at the moment, but it's not being kept hidden forever. Rather, it's waiting for the right time to be revealed. And this chapter from the Gospel According to Spiritism mentions an important point. When we talk about truth, we talk about wisdom. How does that get revealed? Well, this says here, while these religions lagged behind, science and intelligence marched forward and tore open the mysterious veil. So, just as an example, if people who are very religious cling to religiosity, as it were, and refuse to embrace information that is available through other means, like science, for example, if they want to stick their heads in the sand, what's going to happen? Science will reveal truth that way. In other words, the truth will come out. And if religion doesn't make itself available to receive the truth, it will happen some other way. And I'm not saying this to criticize religion. I might be, however, making a comment about the way religion gets practiced sometimes. But more important is this. Spiritism is an even mix of religion, science, philosophy. The truth can come out through any of those, any and all. That's why it's important to treat all three with equal importance, because truth gets revealed in a variety of ways. And therefore, one does not have a monopoly on truth. Science does not have a monopoly on truth. Religion doesn't have a monopoly on truth. And philosophy doesn't have a monopoly on truth. But put all three together, and for us, at our stage of spiritual development, that's a lot. I like this sentence too. There can be no absolute mysteries, and Jesus is right when he says that there is nothing secret that should not be revealed. And then goes on to say, all that is hidden will one day be unveiled, and what humans cannot yet understand on earth will be successively revealed to them in more advanced worlds when they become purified. Down here, we are still in a haze. This is a reference to Spiritism's belief and point, making the point that there are other worlds that spirits can live on. I won't get into that for the sake of this presentation because it's outside the point. But again, all truth will be revealed one way or another. It may take a while, and that's fine, but the idea that nothing will be hidden. So again, are we ready to try and receive whatever truths have not been revealed yet? I'm going to end with a nice quote from Martin Luther King. When we talk about truth, when we talk about having the light, well, whether we receive it or not, whether we can comprehend more truth depends on us. Martin Luther King says, every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. It's a wonderful quote. And it's an important point. When we talk about having the light, when we talk about putting the light on a stand, we are the ones that have to make the decision. Do each and every one of us want to do this? Or do we prefer to live in the darkness of destructive selfishness? And obviously, Martin Luther King is not mincing words here. If we choose to be selfish, and there's lots of ways in which that can occur, then we are inhibiting humanity's progress, and we're also contributing to the suffering of our fellow human beings. But we also have another choice. We can be a source of inspiration to others. We can use the light that each and every one of us has to inspire rather than to avoid. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I hope all of you will watch all of the lessons that are made up of Initiation into Spiritism. This is lesson 24, so we're almost at the very end. And again, if you can watch as many of these as possible, even better, start at the beginning and go through sequentially. But whatever method you might choose, I hope that you find all of these presentations inspiring and make you want to read and study further. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Okay, here's one. What if I don't want my light to shine and I just want to stay at home, not bother anyone, and enjoy life? What's wrong with that? Obviously, we can do that. We can choose to not harm anybody. We can kind of opt out and live for ourselves. Are there any real consequences to that? Well, maybe in the short run, not so much. In the Spiritist codification, there's a comment that it is not enough to avoid wrongdoing. If we fail to do any good, it doesn't help with our spiritual progress. But also, obviously, there can be times where it's very tempting to maybe just take it easy and not participate in life at all, to really just live for ourselves. But imagine, let's say, a scenario like, suppose we were living or staying at a 5-star resort somewhere in the tropics, and we're on the beach every day, and we've got, I don't know, a drink of some kind, and we're basking in the sun and enjoying life. Now imagine doing that every single day. That could get very empty and boring. So there comes a point where wanting to retreat from others, not only does it not help us with our spiritual progress, but it also can lead to us feeling empty. It can actually lead to depression, and it can lead to a feeling of stagnation. And there does come a point where we would get tired of that. But also the Spiritist codification in the Divine Laws that I mentioned, Part 3 of the Spirits book, when it talks about the law of progress, it basically says that the law of progress is inevitable. Can we stay at home and do nothing and not bother anybody and just live for ourselves? Yes. Can we do it forever? No. Eventually something will happen where we are going to get a nudge. The nudge and the severity of that nudge will depend on how resistant we are to trying to move and to work on trying to help others, for instance. And when we help others, it can be in simple ways. It could just be people in our immediate family. But if we truly don't care about anybody, we only want to live for ourselves and no one else, eventually that's going to catch up with us. Okay, let's see the next question. There is one. How can I be a light of the world to others I know? If we try to be a light to others, we may be forcing things. So if we try to naturally be a good example, and what I mean by that is if we work on improving ourselves, if we work on having consciousness, if we, for instance, in some of the comments I mentioned, we learn how to have benevolence towards others, if we learn to practice charity. I mentioned the subject of charity in lesson 23 of Initiation into Spiritism, by the way. There's a great deal of information there based on Paul of Tarsus's first letter, 1 Corinthians, chapter 13. And Paul talks about the attributes of charity. And charity is a quality in which all of them, whether we're learning to be patient, bear all things, endure all things, don't think evil or wrong of others, and so forth, if we are naturally compassionate towards people, the more we do that, the more we are displaying ourselves as an example. And even better is, of course, that it happens naturally, and our intentions are in the right place, meaning our intentions are not self-serving. We're not trying to show off and show everybody how great and wonderful we are, but rather we're naturally believe and can't help but be charitable towards others when a situation occurs. And if all of us are interacting with one another on a regular basis, there'll be lots of situations in which we will have opportunities to be charitable. It's then up to us to decide, are we going to follow them or not? Sometimes we get all kinds of hints and signs to help somebody out in some way. Maybe somebody just needs someone to listen to them. Somebody needs a little extra patience, and so forth. All of these qualities are examples of how we can have that light for others. Okay, let's see if there's another question. What is the most important part of the Christian ideal? Again, I would say benevolence towards others, tolerance towards the imperfections of others, and forgiveness of offenses. All of these are very, very difficult to do fully. If we can begin to, again, an important part of Christianity, foundation of Christianity, is the ability to forgive. Sometimes that gets lost. Sometimes people think more about retribution, punishment, you're going to burn in hell forever, those kinds of things. And yet that really misses the point. If we see God as being truly compassionate, that God is forgiving, that does not mean we aren't held accountable. We are. But are we truly able to not only ask for forgiveness and then do something to improve, but can we forgive others? Because we all are, it's a symbiotic kind of relationship. We often need and are asking others to forgive us because we can be affecting people in all kinds of ways and not know it. But also, if we are in a situation where someone has hurt us, can we forgive them? As I mentioned before, forgiveness is a form of letting know. So that's just some of the qualities of the Christian ideal. Okay, is there another question perhaps? Why do people want to cover their light and live in darkness? I think probably because people are afraid. It can sometimes be easier to avoid having to work harder to face who we really are. Facing our negativity, for instance, requires courage, and it's something that many of us struggle with. And sometimes people want to live in darkness because it feels rather comfortable to them. It depends on what we mean by living in darkness. If it's committing deliberate acts of wrongdoing, criminal behavior, well, people may be doing that because they think it makes them powerful. They're full of anger and rage at the world, and they want to get revenge as much as possible. But the problem with all of this is that it makes us profoundly unhappy. People can choose to cover their light and live in darkness for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up, and it'll eventually we get to a point where it's intolerable. It's like if we engage in any bad habit and we do it over and over and over again, the consequences will eventually catch up to us. But the reason some people want to live in darkness is, again, they struggle with courage. People can also be full of pride and don't see that they have a problem and are not willing to face themselves. Okay. Any other questions? No, I think that's it. All right. I would like to thank all of you for listening. And I would also like to suggest that if you have not had a chance to see all of the other lessons up to this point, I would encourage you to do so. If you can start at the beginning and work your way sequentially, that's even better. We're almost near the end of this series, And I hope you find all of these courses and these lessons very inspiring, and that it makes you want to read further and study further. Thank you for listening, and many blessings to all of you.